Hi, would everybody please take a seat? Great, thank you. And welcome to New Freeway Hall, and thank you for braving the weather to come here. There was an accident on I-5 that stopped me, I think, for a while, but I'm glad to be here, especially with events happening in Boston, which made you sad, but it's great to come together with people who are trying to do something about the situation. So it's, anyway, it's good to be here with everybody. So thank you all for coming. So my name is Henry Noble, and my parents were immigrants from what was called at the time Russia-Poland, when Poland was part of Russia, and they came to this country in the beginning of the last century. And so I feel a great stake in a topic of immigration. First, though, I'd like to point out Ugo and Flora, where I don't see you, though, who are doing doing translation in the back. So if somebody would like to have Spanish translation while we have the meeting, you can sit back there. And thank you very much for doing that. The Freedom Socialist Party is very proud to be hosting tonight's gathering. The FSP has been part of the movement for immigrant rights since our founding, and we see that immigrants are among the strongest leaders in the labor and civil rights struggles. We are optimistic that fundamental changes can be won by bringing together people of all ages and races, immigrants and native-born, men and women, and tonight's forum can be a step in that direction. I hope after tonight's discussion you'll feel welcome to come back here to New Freeway Hall. It's a space where people can come together and strategize to change and to take action. The panel tonight is a majority Latino, and in Washington, Latinos are the largest immigrant population. But of course, immigration laws impact people from many other nationalities as well, including thousands of Asian and Pacific immigrants and folks from Canada, Europe, and many refugees from Africa. To learn more about us and our position on immigration, please take home a copy of this newspaper right on the front page, Immigration Reform, with a socialist perspective. So I've got a very few announcements I'd like to tell you about. And on Wednesday, May 1st, there'll be a March for Immigrant Rights sponsored by the May 1st Coalition. And people are asked to gather at 1 p.m. at St. Mary's Church near 20th and Jackson. And if you want to be there and carry your own sign and banner, you're invited to return here on Sunday the 28th, where there'll be a picket sign making party. So from 2 to 4. So another May Day celebration will be here on Saturday, May 4th, and the International Working Class holiday will honor Clara Fraser, who was the founder of the Freedom Socialist Party and the original socialist feminist. And you can pick up a copy of this flyer. Clara was a daughter of Russian immigrants, and she taught a generation of young radicals and women's liberationists how to stand together to fight discrimination and exploitation. And so please come and help be part of that celebration for May Day. On the 11th, which is the day before Mother's Day, there's going to be a Mother's Day parade on Beacon Hill, and you're all invited to be part of that. The Sisters Organized for Survival and the Marissa Alexander Defense Committee are, I guess, hosting it. You host a parade? I guess you host a parade, or organizing the parade. Excuse me. And it'll be a lot of fun, and kids and balloons and all like that, but also a political message in the rally demanding state-funded child care and services, which the legislators are cutting right now. So this is an important thing, and it would be nice. Please come and help with the organizing if you'd like to do that. And the organizer of this to talk to is Helen Gilbert, and I don't know, she's sitting on the couch over there. So Helen, people can talk to you for the parade if they'd like to be part of the parade. So the plan for the evening is this. We've got 5 really wonderful, illustrious speakers. And after they speak, we'll have about 45 minutes for discussion. And then I'll close the program and invite you all to stay. You can chat with the speakers, chat with one another, and make the most of the evening. And that time is also, you can check out the bookstore. If you didn't notice it when you came in, you can look behind you, an extensive set of books, including Viva la Raza, which is a history of Chicano identity and resistance, which is really a good book, and it's in the bookstore. So our first speaker will be Christina López. Let me make room here while I introduce Christina. Un momentito. Christina is the past president of Seattle Radical Women and author of Estamos en la Lucha, which I have a copy of here. And she was the vice presidential candidate this year for the Freedom Socialist Party. Christina was raised in Arizona and was able to return there to participate in Tucson's Freedom Summer this year. Christina went there because she wanted to show her support for the students who are fighting the Arizona law that banned Latino and other ethnic study programs in the schools. So Christina, please come forth. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming to this Immigrant Rights Forum. Immigrant justice, for me, means opening up the border so workers can go wherever they need to go in order to make a living. It also means unconditional amnesty, closing all the detention centers and getting rid of Homeland Security and ending all deportations. This is what immigrant justice means for me. Opening the border is not so far-fetched when you consider why people immigrate in the first place. People move to wherever they need to go in order to survive, and that is to escape poverty, to escape violence. And a lot of that is due to U.S. foreign policy, which brings military interventions, which imposes free trade agreements, so that pretty much decimates the livelihoods for working people in less powerful countries. So they're forced to move to the United States or in nations that don't have that kind of issues that they have in their own home countries. Millions of people marched in the streets in 2006 to stop an anti-immigration bill. But at that time, we were also marching for amnesty. We were marching for opening the borders. And that, with all the student walkouts, with all the work stoppage, it was very powerful. All the public uprisings for immigrant justice, and especially the May Day marches in 2006, woke the labor movement to include immigrant rights with worker rights. And this is when the rich business owners and the corporations became worried. And so they found a way to contain this popular uprising for immigrant rights. They used their lobbying powerhouse machine to impose the government to do mass deportations, detentions, and they came up with racist attrition policies to deny immigrant workers any rights, benefits, and government services. All immigrant rights organizations sincerely want to stop the raids, deportations, and detentions. But the more conservative immigrant rights groups moved to elect Democrats, and they put a lot of hope in electing Obama for getting comprehensive immigration reform passed. But in his first 4 years in office, this was pretty much ignored, was it not? But instead, the opposite happened. A record number of deportations happened under those 4 years of Obama administration. But now in Obama's second term, it looks like comprehensive immigration reform will be a reality. But I don't like what I'm seeing so far or reading about what's being proposed. The Republicans have their idea for immigration reforms, the Democrats have their idea for immigration reforms, and even Obama has his. But I have to say, they're pretty much similar. There's not that much difference. The Democrats, though, to appeal to their liberal base, will focus a lot on the pathway to citizenship. The Republicans will focus on border security. But basically, they're the same plans. And I don't see how much they had a debate in the Gang of Eight committee, which is made up of 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. Their proposals have provisions for increased money for border security. They also have a pathway to citizenship, although it would be long and there would be arduous. They also have expanded guest worker programs. All of this I do not like because of the provisions will actually make it harder in some cases. The pathway for citizenship, for instance, will take at least 13 years. 13 years and $2,000 in fines, and that, along with the $2,000, there's an additional fees and taxes, and who knows how much that amount will be. Other requirements would require learning English, civics proficiency, no felonies, or no more than 3 misdemeanors, consistent works history, etc. And for those who are already here, there are 3 ways to get immigration status. Immigrant youth who are eligible under the DREAM Act, they will be able to get a green card after 5 years and then immediately apply for citizenship. The rest, they will be able to apply for registered provisional immigration or RPI status. And it will take 10 years after having the status for an immigrant before they can apply for citizenship. Or permanent status, permanent status, which is a green card. And then after they get a green card, they have to wait 3 years before they can apply for U.S. citizenship. But there is a provision in this proposal. Those with registered provisional immigration status, or RPI, will not be eligible for permanent status until Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Homeland Security certifies to the President and to Congress certain provisions. And those provisions are E-Verify is mandatory and fully optional. And they also have to certify that there's a border fence plan and there's also a comprehensive border security strategy for the southern border, not the northern one, the southern border. I guess they're not afraid of Canadians or something. Anyways, Homeland Security would also have to ensure that an electronic exit system which collects all your visa or passport information is in existence in all ports of entry. And this has to be put in place before anybody with RPI status can apply for permanent status. I don't know, that all that electronic information is an invasion of privacy, if you ask my opinion. And we can talk more about that later. Anyways, agricultural workers can apply for the agricultural workers have 2 options. They can apply for this RPI status, or they can apply for a blue card that is available exclusively to farm workers. And it would take 7 years rather than 10 years to get permanent residency. And that's less than the RPI status. However, in those 7 years, the workers can only work in farm worker jobs. That's it. They cannot go to another job that pays more. They're stuck in agricultural work. And to me, it's set up to force people to stay in the farm jobs in an industry that pays low wages, such as getting 13 cents a pound for every berry, for berries picks, for picking berries, 13 cents a pound. That's criminal. If you ever buy those blueberries or those raspberries, it's criminal to pay somebody 13 cents a pound. And in all those years it takes for an immigrant to get a green card, whether it's 7 or 10 years, believe it or not, the bill actually says that they will not be able to receive any public benefits, including Obamacare. I think this is a blatant discrimination, pure and simple. Another major change in the U.S. immigration policy is the shift from family-based unification system to a merit-based system. The shift means individuals will no longer have a way to sponsor family members. The shift will take place in 5 years, but any hopes for immigrants sponsoring the relatives will take longer than 5 years because under the new rules, it would take them over 10 years before they can apply for permanent status or to sponsor their family members, which means parents or siblings. The family sponsorship will be restricted to only spouses and children. Never mind about your siblings, never mind about your mom and dad. Just your spouse and your children. And I have to add, forget about same-sex couples bringing their loved ones or spouses. Forget it. So what is the merit-based system? The merit system will prioritize visas for workers with doctorates in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Points are given based on the level of education. This policy is to make sure that the business and the tech industry gets their workers at a time when education in the United States is being cut or tuitions are increasingly out of control from a lot of families. Also being phased out in the lottery-based immigration is the lottery-based immigration, which relies on quotas to foster diversity based on the number of immigrants from each country. This, it has been said, will restrict immigration from African countries. So I think there's that racist element there. And this new proposal would expand guest worker programs. Historically, many immigrant rights activists, including the Freedom Socialist Party, has opposed guest worker programs because they end up subjecting workers to low wages and some unsafe working conditions. It is a system of indentured servitude which forces a pool of workers to second-class status, and this is not right. And this is why so many immigrant rights and labor organizations work to oppose the expansion of guest worker programs. But as the conservative immigrant rights organizations and labor unions move to elect Democrats and Obama, or working out deals with the Chamber of Commerce, there's been a shift away from opposing guest worker programs. Recently, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka and Chamber of Commerce CEO Tom Donahue met in February and agreed on 3 things. 1, U.S. citizens should have the first opportunity for all U.S. jobs. 2, a new visa would be created that allows guest workers to switch jobs. 3, and the future immigration of low-skilled workers would be relegated to new federal bureau-based, quote, market needs, whatever that means. Trumka endorsed, essentially what Trumka did is he endorsed a temporary worker program at the meetings. He later said that any final deal involving guest workers must include a path to citizenship and labor protection. Even so, in my opinion, this is a retreat from the AFL-CIO's previous staunch opposition to guest worker schemes and its support for Amnesty. And even with the provision where the status of guest workers is no longer tied to their employer, the labor organization has basically agreed to a program which makes immigrants second-class workers. And it needs to be said, a worker can only work for an employer who is registered to hire guest workers. There is also the fact that a guest worker can be deported if they show no official employment for 60 days. And believe me, this would be easily checked out if they put in place a mandatory E-Verify system. For the temporary workers, there are 3 tiers for guest worker visas: skilled, unskilled, and farm workers. This is if you live in another country and you want to come here, then now they have temporary worker visas available. And the first one that I'm going to mention is the H-1B visa. And these are for skilled workers. This bill calls for increasing the skilled worker H-1B visas from 65,000 to over 100,000. And the number may increase to 180,000 depending on labor demands and the unemployment rate. To ensure that increased skilled immigrants do not displace American workers, the bill requires that employers pay higher wages to H-1B workers, and it also requires that jobs first be advertised before hiring H-1B workers. Yeah, I don't trust them to really do that. The corporations will find ways around that. Believe me, they do. I've read enough from the abuses from this to know that there will be abuses. Not only that, even before this is in place, the multi-billion-dollar high-tech industry, Facebook, you guys know what Facebook is, has already lobbied a loophole on this one. And to ensure that the country has enough low-skilled workers, the bill requires a new type of visa, the W visa. This is the unskilled worker visa. The bill calls for a formation of an independent agency, the Bureau of Immigration and Labor Market Research, to decide the annual changes in the visa caps. Depending on the market and labor conditions, again, like the H-1B visa for skilled labor, a company will have to advertise for domestic labor before they're granted a certain number of W visas. But again, companies will find ways around it. And already what's been reported is they had a company advertised for an Oregon position. They advertised in Montana. You know, and they didn't advertise in Oregon, they advertised in Montana, but guess what? They didn't get any applicants. Why? Because they live in Montana. And so, but the company's able to show, look, we've advertised, but we got no applicants. The other thing that the companies will do is that they'll have the job opening and they'll advertise it, but the place that you go to apply is way out there in the boondocks where there is no public transportation, or it's in an ungodly hour where no one's up. So at least you advertise this job, but no one applies. Why? Because they make it impossible to apply. Now, if I'm looking for a job right now, if there was a job opening in Idaho that I see advertised here, I'm not going to go to Idaho. I'm looking for jobs here. Anyway, so they get around it, and so then based on this, they're able to say, well, we need temporary workers here. You know, and okay, and then the third tier would be the agricultural guest worker status for farm workers. The permit is good for 3 years, and then you can renew it every 3 years after that. But under this visa, this is the visa where you cannot bring your family members, and you cannot get permanent status or citizenship. I guess the farms want to make sure that they get the people picking the produce and stuff, but it's just not, you know, you see that second two-tiered status. I mean, for me, I think for any justice, I mean, there has to be equality across the board. You know, really. And that's why I advocate on open border and full unconditional amnesty and closing down Homeland Security, you know, get rid of the police state. Anyways, the role of radicals in the labor movement is very important, and I want to close with that. It is great that organized labor supports immigrant rights and fights for their rights as workers, but the compromise with big business and by the top labor leaders is not good. Strong labor activists are needed to steer labor unions away from compromise and towards a more radical approach. You know, everybody who marched in the streets, who did a walkout, student walkout, deserves a lot better than what's being compromised on what's being discussed in Capitol Hill or proposed in Capitol Hill. The Freedom Socialist Party has several members who are active in their unions and have succeeded in getting support from their unions to oppose guest worker programs and to support unconditional amnesty. Additionally, labor organizations like Organized Workers for Labor Solidarity, the King County Labor Council, and WSFI, the state workers union, all passed resolutions to oppose guest workers and also for amnesty. The Freedom Socialist Party members will continue to go to our unions and to the broader labor movement as it is vital that labor plays an important role for moving things forward for immigrants. Relying on grassroots people rather than elected officials or top leaders is the best hope for immigrant justice. A movement needs to be built here and needs the influence of radical, socialist, or anti-capitalist activists. That is the role of radicals, to push social justice movements forward towards revolution. And I want to add the vital need for women leaders. I met a lot of immigrant women leaders. I mentioned some of them in the pamphlet, Estamos en la Lucha. We can learn a lot from these inspiring women leaders because they set an example for everyone here. They're the ones who are protesting outside detention centers, who walk the strike line to fight for better wages and working conditions, who march to end raids and deportations, or who go door to door to let bury farm workers that they have rights as workers and as human beings. This, more than electing Democrats or Republicans, is where the hope will be for all immigrants and all workers. Yes, we can. Sí se puede. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. That was very rousing. You should have heard her when she was running for vice president. It's really lovely. Our next speaker will be Pedro Olguin. Pedro is an organizer with Teamsters Local 117 and a member of the union's Latino caucus. He's been a union organizer since 2006 and has experienced firsthand, both here and in Southern California, how U.S. immigration laws undercut workers' ability to fight for justice on the job. Some of you may have experienced his forceful leadership on the line in the recently successful strike at United Natural Foods. And Pedro, will you come up, please?
How do you follow Christina? I mean, oh my God. I keep joking about I have nothing to say and people laugh about it. I really don't know where to start. First of all, I do want to say thank you. I was speaking to Henry. I met Henry in a picket right outside the Mexican consulate as brothers and sisters in Mexico were being canned and thrown in jail for standing up for their rights. In Mexico, it's crazy, right? Because it's all monopolized labor, and so for the past 80 years, what you've had is one. I don't want to say political party, but you've had one Central Labor Council that over the years has sold out, and so because of that, they've entrenched themselves in not wanting to progress, right? Something that we've seen on and off with the AFL-CIO at times, right? So the electricians are a very radical, progressive union out there in Mexico, and so that's where I met Henry, so supporting that. I think I had been out here like 3 weeks in Seattle, so that was nice.
Thank you.
But you guys are definitely a beacon of hope out here in the community as they continue to gentrify the community, and you guys are being here. You guys are an amazing voice, so thank you for being here. That said, where should we start? I really don't know where to start. I guess what we can start is what we've seen. This new immigration reform bill that they're proposing, that we basically swallow is a very poison pill, especially when you come out of the immigrant rights trajectory, right? That's how I got my start. And maybe we should start there. I came of age at a time where being politicized and being active in your immigrant rights was very connected to your who you are, right? The color of your skin, and it wasn't optional. It really wasn't optional, even though for some folks it might seem like, oh, the 70s, you know. No, 1994 was a very pivotal year for a lot of youth, and I myself included, right? They proposed this law that was called 187. 187 was a criminalization of immigrants, right, where they were going to use doctors and teachers to identify really in a very draconian way who was legal and who wasn't legal based on a simple question, right? So you couldn't receive any type of services, you couldn't receive any type of emergency treatment. People were really scared. It really threw people under the shadows, right? And I think up to that point, 1996, what you had, at least in LA, right, and the majority of people down in LA are Latino immigrant. What you had was all of a sudden this realization, like, just because we're here and we've been here for a long time doesn't mean we're exempt from any level of discrimination, and we've got to do something about it. Luckily, some of those folks were what's called the IRCA generation, right? Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, and so these folks benefited from that Immigration Reform and Control Act. They had been longtime residents. They never wanted to become citizens, and when they saw 187 coming down the pipeline, they said, oh, they're after us, right? And so who's coming after us? Pete Wilson. And so that was a galvanizing moment where, yeah, 187 was lost, but the blowback that they've got is that you had a new generation of youth, activist youth, much like the dreamers of today, right? These folks, I remember being in walkouts where we walked out 40, 50 high schools at the same time. And because of the work that we had done, we went nationally. We went into Arizona, we went into Texas. I actually came to Seattle when I was 15 to jumpstart some of the organizing out here from Seattle Central Community College, right? And so, and Boca being one of my sponsors to come out here, Juan Jose Bocanegra. So it was really exciting times, and it really pushed us to the forefront. And all of a sudden, our parents that for a long time refused to become citizens, right? They would say, you know what, I'm the immigrant of tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm going to go back, tomorrow I'm going to go back, tomorrow I'm going to go back, and always the same thing, I'm always going to go back, right? It's just a jump and a skip away, and I'm already in my country. And then the realization came to us, we're not leaving, we're going to be here. And then it led to a huge wave of people becoming citizens. I'm talking about, we were helping people out with this small nonprofit that we were running, called One Stop Immigration, and we had 1,000 people a day coming in trying to become citizens. And it was those kind of movements that I think radicalized Latinos, right, in a lot of ways. The new wave of immigrants, right, that new wave of Latinos that became citizens, all of a sudden they became so radicalized that all you have to say to them, even to this day, people like my parents, be careful with Pete Wilson, and the Republicans are Pete Wilson, who was a governor in California at that time, and that's all you got to say, and they'll vote Democrat, they'll vote however you tell them to vote. That's all you need to say. Oh, it's Pete Wilson, oh, fuck it. Boom, we're against it, right? And it's amazing level of consciousness that built, right? But what we've seen over the since 1994 as the California model for handling immigration, right? And let's be clear, right? It does come, I do agree with Christina, right? Is that the immigration sentiment in this country is very conservative and outright racist, right? And it's that way because of the demographic shift that we've experienced in the last 20 years, to be honest. I mean, let's be frank about that, right? Since we're among friends here, and I'm not at the local, so I could be a little bit more open about it. So that's the truth, right? That's what we've seen. And so as the California experience has kind of gone nationwide, what we've seen is this backlash, right? And then in Arizona about 2006, right? The huge blowback that we've got there. But what we've seen, right, is the codification of an immigration policy that's based on the exploitation of immigrant labor. Right? Let's go ahead and criminalize them. Let's make them less. Let's throw them into the shadows, right? And from the shadows, we can exploit them. And that's really the experience that we bring here. And it's a lot of hope, at least to me, to see very young people like the sister right here that are taking up that new fight. I really, really do appreciate that. These dreamers, they're an example to us. And so what happened is that there was unions, right, that said, wait a minute, if we continue with our immigration policies of exclusion, and the Teamsters have been, I think, a murky history to say the least, you know, they realized we better start working with these folks, right? And so the work that we had done in LA in 1994 culminated in 2000. It was a simultaneous act that happened, right? We had labor leaders coming out of the Chicano movement in the 70s that integrated into labor, more kind of like the old lefty kind of folks that were there, right? And an organization that was key, right? Going a little bit into history, I'm sorry to jump around back and forth. It's just stream of consciousness. Nothing's written down. And so what we've had, right? We had these old lefties that come out of what's called Casa Hermandad, and there was this pivotal gentleman, Bert Corona, who kind of inspired folks. He came out of the ILWU, and he put people into the labor movement, and that's at the same time that Cesar Chavez was organizing, and they went to the farms and they learned how to organize, and they came out of that and started joining different unions, right? Some of them went to the Teamsters, some of them went to SEIU, the majority went to SEIU. And so you're getting this demographic change in the 90s, this radicalization of like Latinos that want to be part of labor, that are fighting to get into labor. You got the old lefties that are kind of pushing for it. So they all kind of converge really nicely in the 90s. And then all of a sudden, it culminates like in 2000 with the J for J, Jobs for Justice campaign, contract campaign, where all of a sudden you've got 8,000 janitors out on strike for 3 weeks. And these folks are coming, these are mostly immigrant women coming out of Central America, and you've got women from Mexico City and formal students, and you got all these folks that are very progressive in the thoughts, and we're in the middle of the street and we're taking on the cops. And it was, and I'm I'm going to college. I'm already kind of involved. I get involved in that, and it's at midnight and 2 in the morning, and the cops are trying to kick us out of downtown LA. So just imagine Bellevue and downtown Seattle, the whole skyline into one place, and then you got 5,000 women surrounding downtown LA. Nobody comes out. Nobody goes in. This is it. The fight is here. We're gonna shut you down. And their chant up to this point was, even today I remember, is, "We're on strike. Let the rich man clean." Right? And then, and then we're out there trying to hold the line and everything, and I see this dump truck just coming in, and it slams on its brakes. The guy, big burly guy, comes out, kind of like my brother back here. He comes out and he's like, "What the fuck is this?" And you got immigrant women trying to talk to the guy. "Oh, the strike line, the strike line." And the guy looks at them. "Well, I'm a Teamster and I don't cross the line." And when I saw that, I'm like, yeah, I want to be a Teamster. And so that was one of my first introductions to the Teamsters Union in a real way, I had been a member. I'll be honest, I had been a UPSer for a couple of years up to that point, and I hadn't really gotten involved in the union, and this was right after the 1996 strike, so we're coming in, and I'm like, I'm young, whatever, but I saw that, and to me, that's an example of there's where I want to be at, right? And so that's really my inclination into labor. Wow, one more minute. So that's my inclination into labor. We start organizing, and I go into SEIU. We start organizing in 2006. We started fighting for our contract fight in 2008. So 2 years of organizing with them, and then we go into organizing warehouse workers, right? So we go out into the valley. It's about 115 degrees during the summer, and it's all mostly immigrant people. And I don't want to talk about how badly we're getting treated, because one thing that I've learned, and maybe that's a good summary, right? One thing that I've learned is that we should not live in the shadows, right? If anything, our life experiences has taught us that we need to be out in front. And it's not until we're out in front that we give a voice to say, let's negotiate, but from a different bottom. Right? And that's really what we want to be able to accomplish. And what I've seen over my short time, and honestly, I don't have as much experience as Henry here, but the Justice for Janitors campaign in 2000, and then in 2004 and 2006 in Texas, the Immokalee Workers Association, that we launched a huge hunger strike, and I'm so glad that I was part of that movement. Also had the opportunity to go to Florida. The United Warehouse Workers in California. And here locally, we've taken on several campaigns that are mostly immigrant-led. So for example, lumpers. These are guys that are unloading trucks that are getting paid less than minimum wage. They're getting per piece, and they've been standing up. We've organized them. Unfortunately, we came really close to winning some of those campaigns. We actually won one last year by a complete landslide, 9-1. It was amazing, but then the company turns around, their primary, and I don't want to mention the company, but their primary warehouse, these are subcontracted workers. All of a sudden, after they win, they kick them out of the warehouse and bring in a new subcontractor. So it's horrible, right? And now, more recently, we're organizing the airport workers at here in SeaTac, right? And these are mostly East African, Somali, Eritrean, Ethiopian workers, right? And they're standing up strong. And so what I know is that even though no matter what law is being pushed at us, right, when workers stand up and they fight, they do win. And that's the example that we've had. Luckily, I'm part of a very progressive local. I'm glad to say, not 252, I love it, but my brothers and sisters from Local 117, they're amazing, right? It really is a good local, and we've taken on the fights. Waste management, the hugest transnational corporation, right? We've taken them on and we've won. UNFI, the second largest, the Walmart of I don't know, natural foods. We've taken them on and we've won, right? Coke, we've taken them on and we've won. The cold storage industries, we've taken them on and we've won. And in every single one of those fights, there's been immigrant labor behind them, and they've stood strong. And the reality is that we shouldn't look at, oh, poor immigrants, but let's move forward and we can fight and we can win. All right?
I'd like to also recognize that, that Pedro's family came. And his wife, Sandy, is an immigration lawyer and has a beautiful son, and they're both sitting in the back there, so you can say hi. April Alvarez is 14 and a student at Youngstown Southwest Alternative High School in West Seattle. And we're very pleased that she is here to represent the younger generation who is being affected by the terrible immigration laws in this country. At the beginning of this school year, April spent a few months in Mexico to be with her mother, who was deported. April has resumed her education in Seattle and expected to attend Chief Sealth High School with her classmates, but Sealth would not accept the classes credits that she earned in Mexico, so that's why she's at this other school. But she's getting ready to go to Chief Sealth. So before April begins, I'd especially like to welcome April's father, Lucas, and her sister, America, who is here but is someplace else now. So welcome here. We're so glad that you came.
Well, my name's April, and I live here in West Seattle. I was born in San Diego, California, and like the reason I'm here today is because I want to say the story of like what happened with my mom and why I want the law of the new Amnesty immigration reform to change into a better one, because if there's gonna be one, like it should be like a good one. It shouldn't be like, they shouldn't treat like Mexicans like second, like slaves, or like different types of people. Like they should, we are all equal, you know? And yeah. And well, like when my mom was taken away, it was 2.5 years ago, my first day of 7th grade, and there were these two guys. They were, you know, like not uniform, they're like dressed in normal clothes, and they were following us to my school, because they can't grab my immigrated people at schools, you know. So my mom dropped me off, and when she wanted to come off the car to go home, they got off and they grabbed her, and my mom tried to escape, but then she ran, and both of them grabbed her and threw her on the floor, and she got scraped, and she was yelling for help, you know, because she doesn't want to be taken away, right? And well, like it was a surprise. Like I really need my mom here, you know, and like everybody, like when as a teenager needs their mom, right? But she's gonna come back soon. Yeah, it's been a while, and she's getting her papers done. And how she got deported was because this crooked lawyer who got mad at her, my dad had paid for the lawyer already, but when we moved from San Diego to here, he got mad, I guess, that we didn't tell him or something, and he put deportation, to get out of the, yeah, and I was like, wow, and he had paid, my dad paid around $5,000, I think, dollars for that, and that's not fair, you know, there's just, it's not fair. I don't like how some, United States sometimes have to be racist like this, we're all humans, we all are the same, just and last year, because I miss being with my mom, I went to Mexico, to Tijuana, to study over there, and it's so different over there. Like a lot of kids are in need. Like it's not all about like marks, like shoe marks and like clothes marks. Like people don't wear like all that. They don't care, like as much as over here. All about like Nikes and Jordans and North Face and all that stuff. Like no, like this little girl and this restaurant I was gonna go eat with my mom. She was sitting outside like poor, like she didn't have shoes on, and she was asking people for money, and like that is so sad. Like she was asking me, like she's like, do you have any money? And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't. And then I was like, do you have parents? She's like, no, I don't know, they don't like me. She's like, I'm hungry. And I was like, well, we can give you some food, and that's the best you can do. Like Mexico, yeah, it's like people are there good, and just needs like more help, like with government and all that, Yeah, but this new reform, immigration reform, I hope it changes into a better one. Like if there's gonna be one, there should like be a good one, like not treat people like the slaves, the workers and all that like there's gonna be a visa. I'm barely learning on all this, but yeah, like they shouldn't do that. I hope the like President Obama does something better, like, because that's what we were voting for, like that they give a reform, and where is it? Like, yeah, but while being down there in Tijuana, there was these kids, like I made friends, and they were like who would cross the border at like 4 a.m. They have their family over there, and they study over here in the United States, to go to school over here and live over there because their parents don't have papers. And like that's just like wow, because they want to move like forward, for a better future. And over there, school you have to pay to go to school. Over here, it's like free, and I'm like wow. Over there, you have to pay for everything, like for the uniform, for the books, and for everything. It's all like about money. Like the teachers don't really care that much. So that's why I came back soon. Like yeah, it was too much money. But I think they should open the border. It's like, how can people come into Mexico? Like all types of people, and with no problem, and like we can't come over here, we can't come over here, like that's not fair. But I think it's because the economy here in the U.S., right? Because they think that we're gonna take all the jobs, when really supposedly there's not even that many jobs, left. Yeah, and like since I think this reform will help a little. Just needs to like be good. I hope they treat us better and stuff, and they actually help like Mexicans get their papers, because yeah, we need this. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like I can't, like I'm telling my story, I don't know much about all this information and stuff. I'm learning while listening to you guys, and I'm glad you guys are here. This is cool. This is good. Yeah. Well, I hope this helps, like this reform and all this talk, the speeches and all this helps for like, so we can get a better reform. We can people can get their papers faster and everything, and families can unite, because all this like deporting and people like just separate families, man. like it's bad. Like, I need my mom here, you know. She's coming back soon, 6 months, I think. Yeah, 2 months. Yeah. So this is good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Your mom would be very proud to hear you. And maybe there's a movie? Are you making a video? Oh, that's great. And your story is part of reminding us what we're fighting about. So thank you. Next speaker is Miriam Padilla. And Miriam is a student at the Ida B. Wells High School, which is located on the University of Washington campus. The school serves underrepresented students and, with a focus on social justice, helps them prepare to go to college. Miriam was born and raised in Los Angeles, which is the center of the fight for immigrant rights in this country, as Pedro told us. Her parents and older sister emigrated from Mexico, and she sees the need for fundamental change in immigration law from her own experience. I would also like to welcome her teacher and classmates who came with her tonight. So thank you for coming. Miriam? So you need to speak into that part.
Okay. Good evening. Buenas noches. My speech is not that very long, but I have a couple of stories that I would like to share with you tonight. So my name is Miriam Padilla. I'm a student at Ida B. Wells School for Social Justice. My mother left Mexico and came to the United States in 1990. She crossed the border with my older sister, who at the time was 8 months old. I grew up not having my father around because he was always working. And at the time it was difficult for him to find a job because he didn't have a Social Security card. So he spent most of his days in front of Home Depot and just, hours there waiting for work to show up. My older sister, she's always loved school, a little more than I used to. She was always a straight A student. She always had perfect attendance, always on the honor roll. I used to be kind of jealous. I saw her stress out all of her 4 high school years. She would say to me how her dream was to graduate from high school and take care of my mom and dad. She finally reached her senior year in school and started applying for college. She applied at the University of Southern California, and the day that her letter of acceptance came, she was ecstatic because she got in. But due to her immigration status, she was unable to receive any financial aid from the federal or state government. She was devastated, of course. She got super depressed, and she thought her stress during those 4 years was for nothing, and she was sort of giving up. And we have always lived paycheck to paycheck, so there was no way my parents would be able to afford her tuition. So eventually my sister found work to support her thirst for education. She went to a community college and then transferred to UCLA, where she now attends. Another story that I would like to share with you tonight is one of my classmates who was supposed to be a speaker tonight but couldn't make it because he had to go to work. His name is Cesar Garcia. His mother got deported 4 years ago to Honduras. His dad passed away before he was born, so he had no one other than his brothers to take care of him, who knew nothing about how to raise a child. So he had no mentor. His brothers eventually kicked him out of the house of their home, so he was homeless. He now lives with a friend and his family, and will be attending the University of Washington this upcoming fall. And yeah, I guess these are stories that, although they had to go through all the immigration, deportation and not having papers and not having money to pay for school, through hard work and strong sense of hope, they both look forward to a good future to help his family, and their community, because they're both active and, they help out a lot with all this immigrations. And this is what education can provide. Being taught the truth about oppression, where it comes from and why, is very liberating. Suddenly, one gets to see the bigger picture. It's not simply a matter of being limited or incapable of thinking academically. It's more about having that clear understanding of why things are the way they are. History teaches us the forces of power, and it is from this same power that people like us, working people, are liberated from such oppression. I want my human rights, our human rights, to be respected, and together we can get it done. We must actively voice our interest now, because the time is now. I will always put to heart what Cesar Chavez said: once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. Thank you.
Well said, Miriam. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Lois Danks, who traveled here from Port Angeles to speak tonight. Lois is the coordinator of Stop the Checkpoints, which is a coalition of residents that mobilizes against the Border Patrol harassment of immigrants, the spread of private detention centers, and the militarization of the borders. Lois got really mad in 2009 when the Border Patrol began setting up checkpoints on Highway 101, stopping every driver and asking for ID and looking for undocumented immigrants. Lois, who is with the Port Angeles chapter of Radical Women, reserved a meeting room at the city library and called a community meeting, and 50 angry neighbors showed up and formed the organization Stop the Checkpoints. They held a successful rally against the Border Patrol checkpoints and are still going strong as they're planning their 5th year anniversary this year. So Lois, come up, please.
Thanks, Henry. We've heard some great information from Christina and Pedro about the guest workers and the Gang of Eight's bill on immigration rights. And we've heard some really heartfelt stories from April and Miriam about real life and what the current system does to families and to students and to children. I want to focus more on the enforcement parts of the proposed immigration bills. There's been increasing security buildup along the northern border over the last decades. The last few years it's been happening a lot more, and it's mostly under the radar. Most people hear about what's happening on the southern border with building a wall and everything, but I want to tell you about what's been going on in Port Angeles and along the northern border, and to tell you about some experiences of Stop the Checkpoints in fighting against this buildup. On the Olympic Peninsula, we have only a water border with Canada. We already have a Coast Guard station, a Navy base, several tribal police departments. We have national park rangers and fisheries agents, as well as the usual city, county, and state law enforcement. In the past 6 years, the Border Patrol has come in and built a new $12 million station in Port Angeles. They've opened offices for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and for their Air and Marine Enforcement Division. They've stationed 2 Homeland Security gunboats in our boat haven, and they have 2 armed helicopters at our airport. 3 other Border Patrol stations in the northern border, costing over $20 million each, have been built in Washington. 2 more in northern Idaho at the border, 4 in Montana, and so on across the country to Maine. This doesn't make the news very much. They're doing it quietly in a lot of small towns. New detention centers are being built, and existing ones like Tacoma's Northwest Detention Center have been expanded recently. That one from 1,000 beds to 1,500 beds. And they try to keep them full all the time. This detention center is a for-profit prison that's owned by Geo Group. They get paid with our tax money about $150 per bed per day. So doing the math, which is what I do, that's $375,000 a day. Wow. And over $13 million a year just at that one detention center. And it's to their benefit to have the Border Patrol detain as many people as possible because they make more money off of it. So on the Olympic Peninsula, also in the last 5 years, Border Patrol agents have been increased from 6 to 42. We've had their SUVs parking outside Spanish Mass at the Catholic Church. We've had them park near soccer practices to check parents when they come to pick up their kids. They demand documents from people shopping in Mexican grocery stores. They board public transit buses and question riders. And they just generally cruise through our neighborhoods day and night, all over the peninsula. And that's because there's 42 agents. Not that many people swim up to the border in the Olympic Peninsula. So they don't have much to do except drive around and hassle people who are already here and who have been here for decades and generations. We've had children afraid to go to school or getting sick at school with worry because their parents might be gone when they go home. The Border Patrol makes bogus traffic stops of anyone with darker skin. The impacts of this buildup have been severe. They've even cost the life of Benjamin Roldan Salinas a couple years ago. A forestry agent stopped him and called the Border Patrol to help translate. Benjamin ran and drowned in the river, leaving a partner and 2 children. The forestry agent called the Border Patrol to help translate even before talking to Benjamin and his partner, who both spoke English. The forestry department was later found to have violated the civil rights of people on the Olympic Peninsula and had to post notices to that effect in their offices. So in Forks, the small town out to the west of the peninsula with the largest immigrant population, it felt like occupied territory. Many immigrants, Mexican, Guatemalan, Filipino, who had lived and worked here for decades, were deported, leaving families with children behind. Many other immigrants closed their businesses, quit their jobs, and left for Oregon or the interior of the country to get away from the Border Patrol harassment. Some who are citizens left because the racial profiling and the harassment they faced every day. Women in the community, Hispanic, Native American, and white, rallied around those affected families who stayed and helped support them while protesting what had happened. Stop the Checkpoints started, as Henry said, when 2 things happened that outraged much of the peninsula. The first was the speedy 2-day deportation of Edgar Ayala, who was brought here as a toddler. A recent high school graduate with a straight A average. He was the state wrestling champ. He worked an after-school job to help support his family, and he was considered a role model for all the young people in Forks. Students walked out of school and led a protest rally along the main street in Forks with signs saying, "Bring Edgar home, keep families together, and feds out of Forks." At the same time, the checkpoints that Henry described were being set up on Highway 101, the only road on or off the peninsula. Border Patrol, FBI, DEA, State Patrol, bomb-sniffing dogs, drug-sniffing dogs. They stopped every single car and demanded proof of citizenship. If you had an accent, a darker skin, or a hippie van, you were pulled over to have your car searched, And that would take hours. Out of 40,000 people that they questioned, less than 0.1% were detained, and most of those were for outstanding traffic warrants. But this was all being done to protect us from terrorists, drug runners, and immigrants. So the outrage over that event, those two events triggered us to call a meeting, as Henry said. And we formed a united front called Stop the Checkpoints. And there are some displays on the literature table back there with photos of some of our activities. And I'd love to talk to people afterwards if you want to know more. Our group agreed on 4 principles of unity: defend civil liberties, no to racial profiling, raids, and detentions, defend immigrant workers and their families, and no police state on the peninsula or anywhere. Within 2 weeks, we held the largest protest rally ever held on the peninsula, with over 200 people from towns all across the peninsula, some of which were 2 hours apart. And we had people come from Port Orchard, Auburn, and Seattle too. One of the best parts of that rally in March was when a woman from the Hoh tribe near Forks showed up with a tribal van full of Native American youth. They came to speak up and march in support of their immigrant friends who couldn't come because of fear of deportation. And they led our march around town. The media coverage of this event, of our action, spread, and the public outcry that followed put an end to the checkpoints. To this day, they have not had another highway checkpoint on the peninsula. Later on, we protested them boarding our public transit buses and questioning people, and that was brought to a stop too. There are now several class action suits and complaints in process over the fake translation assistance calls from local police and over bogus traffic stops. And some complaints have been filed by the Makah tribe over the harassment of a van of elders by Border Patrol agents. They think anyone with a brown skin apparently came from Mexico. But a van of elders was stopped on their way to a conference from Nia Bay coming into Port Angeles. And the elders were made to get out of the van and sit on the bank beside the road for 2 hours until someone could come from the tribal center to bring enrollment papers with pictures to prove that they were elders. That complaint's still in process. We don't know what'll happen. Oh, 1 minute more. Okay. Another victory we had was by holding public street corner protests to help a young Korean man whose visa had expired. He was detained while loading produce at a farmer's market and taken to the detention center. The public outcry helped him get a waiver to stay with his elderly parents and work on their vegetable farm. We haven't always had victories, but we've always made an impact by getting out in the streets and not relying just on lobbying or going through official channels. We're still going after 5 years because we know we have an impact and there's so much more to do. So with all this stuff happening already, the prospect of more enforcement in this new immigration bill is outrageous. All the proposals, whether it's House or Senate, Democrat, Republican, even President Obama's, will only make things worse, as Christina said, in the enforcement area, and waste billions of our tax money by putting enforcement first. $18 billion is spent every year on border enforcement. And the new Senate bill would add another $6.5 billion. And some of the things included are more agents, more drones, more planes, more surveillance equipment, more detention centers, a southern border wall, and sending the National Guard to the border to help build the wall. And all this before the first green card can be requested. All this would have to be done. The bill requires mandatory E-Verify, which you've heard about. And it would allow Homeland Security to build roads and stations and to patrol on federal lands like national parks and national forests without regard to any environmental laws. Let me see here. And you've all heard about surveillance cameras going up everywhere. There's 16 of them on the Port Angeles waterfront, which is only 3 blocks long. So, do you think this starts to sound like a police state? And all of this would be in place before anybody could even apply for a green card. So, as the U.S. economy tanks and employment and evictions increase, the environment's being destroyed, jobs are going offshore, people will get more and more angry and fed up with this. I can see why Wall Street and their politicians want to have a strong force available to spy on and control any public unrest, protests, or general strikes. By demonizing immigrants, they have an excuse to create a police state. And at the same time, help out big corporations like Geo Group, Boeing, and Microsoft, which will make even more enormous profits building drones, gunboats, etc. So who really benefits from this immigration bill? Not the public in a surveillance society, not the millions of immigrant workers and family who have to hope they can still find the path 13 years from now to citizenship, and not the people who need the public services that money should go for. Only people that benefit are corporations and politicians. So seeing how the profit system is behind all this is why I'm a socialist. Under the profit system, we'll have to keep fighting these battles over and over again. We won't really win until we can dump the profit system and move to a system where working people control the fruits of their own labor, and we can organize society for the common good. We can't look to the Democrats for help, and we certainly can't look to Obama. He's deported 400,000 people last year, and they're still deporting 8,000 people a month. So passing this bill would be a hollow, dangerous victory, not really something that I want to celebrate. The few crumbs in it will get negotiated away in hopes that the Democrats can claim a bipartisan victory and keep some of his Latino votes. What we need to do is what Christina said: grant immediate amnesty, stop the deportations, close the detention centers, do away with all guest worker programs, and open the borders. Then maybe we can do something about overturning NAFTA and CAFTA and the trade agreements and stopping the U.S. government and Wall Street interference in other countries that causes people to migrate in the first place. This may sound ambitious, especially when there are not as many thousands in the street as there were back in May Day 2006. But Stop the Checkpoints has seen that people in small towns can fight back and have a big impact. If you're outraged about something, there are bound to be others who feel the same way. Organize them and plan some actions. Connect your issues with other movements. Do whatever you can wherever you are. And together we'll make bigger and bigger impacts, and we'll push the fight forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. It's very inspiring to hear the fight back. And I thank all the speakers. At this point, we'd like to let you get out and ask questions of these people. And we'll take a number of questions, and then I'll ask the speakers if they'd like to respond, so not everyone as it occurs. And we've allotted about 45 minutes for this discussion. So somebody have a question you'd like to raise? Comments are all right.
Don't bunch up.
My children went to Chief Sealth High School, and I say, shame on Chief Sealth High School. They call themselves an international high school. And they don't accept international credits. Write a letter to the West Seattle Herald. That's ridiculous. Chief Sealth High School is a very diverse high school. It's about a quarter Hispanic, a quarter black, a quarter white, a quarter Asian. I was proud of my kids going there. I think that they deserve it. They deserve the school is going to. not take those credits.
Actually, what you just said in the letter to the Herald would really work, perhaps.
Because they will print it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Somebody else stimulated? We had all these really interesting speakers. Anybody disagree vehemently and think that this is the best bill that was ever? Sue?
Well, no, I don't think it's the best bill ever. Especially after listening to our speakers, but I wanted to start a letter around, April's actually my neighbor, and we were talking, and her mom is going through legal stuff right now, so I drafted a letter to Patty Murray, asking her to step in and cut the red tape, please. So I'm going to pass it around, and if people would sign it, I know that her father Lucas could use it to turn in with the arguments for whether mom should be brought back sooner. So I'm going to start that around. And I really wanted to thank all of the speakers, and especially our 2 high school students. I think it was a really good combination of the younger and the older generation. And I'm glad that we're not losing the lessons from the past so that they don't have to repeat them all. It's very important to pass on. I didn't have a question, but I just want to say I was really proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to ask a question specifically of Pedro. With your organizing experience in LA, that's really a hotspot and an epicenter for the sort of resistance movements you participated in. How do you foresee bringing those movements from LA, spreading them, and how can Seattle become a little bit more radical in opposing these policies and supporting the movement?
Wow. I don't know. Every community is different, right? Every community's got their own particulars. I think. I mean, let's be real, right? In LA, you also have like this other history that's there, where people were willing to shoot each other for wearing the wrong color, for crossing, and this is just coming from South Central. I came out of Compton. So I'm telling you, like, people have this sense of pride in their own communities that here in Seattle, being new to the city, right, it's very porous, and so you don't have that, at least not what I've seen outside. I think Rainier Valley may be a different kind of aspect to it, as communities are being pushed out because of gentrification. I think you're losing that sense of connection, and that's important, right? So I think what we've have more out here in Seattle is a sense of like communities of interest. And so how do we identify, how do we get out there to make sure that our message is being heard with everyone else and we're connecting these communities? That's a hard question. I don't know. That's something that even as an organizer, we struggle, right? Because we're out there in the front line trying to like organize workers, and it has been a struggle, right? And there is an important history, I think, coming out of Seattle, right? And not being from Seattle, but I would be really proud if I were to say we shut down the WTO right here. So, I mean, you guys did something right. You know, for real. So the question is, how do we go back to that? And that's maybe something that it's more of a long-term question. I know I'm not really answering and just dancing around it, but sister, if there was something we could do, we would have done it, right? But it's a learning process, right?
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, thank you, speakers, and I have to say that the immigration bill is like 900 pages. How come they need so many words to cover up garbage? One of the things, I'm wearing this button tonight, and it says, "No human being is illegal." And it was put out by the AFL-CIO, which is kind of one of the overarching labor organizations in 2006. And I think we need to really work in the labor movement to expose the sham of some of this immigration legislation and put forth the open borders and the solidarity of workers across lines and expose Obama, who is supposed to be a friend and so much of labor supported, for deporting us in the largest sense. So think of ideas along that line other than educating at every single opportunity that we can. I think it's so urgent right now.
Thank you. Gil?
Yes, I'd like to thank all the speakers. This afternoon, I will be reading sections of Viva La Raza by Yolanda Ortiz. There are a lot of lessons in the book, and there's nothing new with in terms of the Democrats. In 1969, as Huerta and Chavez moved closer to the Democrats, they informed on immigrant workers to INS, and they only got worse from them. So, I mean, the lesson is, the Democratic Party is not our friends, and it's a very dangerous road to follow.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I think these are wonderful speakers, and I hope to see all these presentations written down and given out. One of the things that's so striking is that although we have these headlines about immigration and disarmament, there's a lot of invisible things going on, like Lois was saying. And I'm wondering how we can make these things more visible. Like the wonderful poster there, No Papers, No Fear, that was an amazing event that happened, was it last summer, on DocuBus, and they made things really visible. They went all over the country, and they gave workshops, and they were just amazing young people. But I'd like to know how this can be made more visible. The detention center in Tacoma, 3,500 beds, is it something absurd and obscene? Nobody even knows it's there. I'm in the art field, and I'm interested in getting more art about this problem. And every time I bring it up with an artist, they go straight to prisons, and they say, "Oh, it's prison." Well, prisons and immigration detention centers are run by the same model, except for one big, huge difference is that detention people do not have access to the criminal justice system at all. They have a whole separate system of justice. And I would like to know if there's some more ways where we can make, I guess you can't even call it a separate system of justice. It's a separate system. Where we can make this visible. Is anybody got any ideas on that, other than going in the street, or in addition to going in the street?
Thank you. Lois, did you want to say something?
My hearing's not that great, but I think I got the gist of it. How to let people know about things like the detention center that's in Tacoma, down in the industrial flats where nobody sees it or anything. Even if you have a demonstration there, nobody sees your demonstration. But one of the key things we found in Port Angeles is that everybody reads the letters to the editor. It's the most interesting part of the paper. It's probably the only part that's true, basically, in the mass media. But we get something going in the letters to the editor. We write in, like I was at a forum last night and I found out this horrifying thing about this detention center and it should be stopped. And then hopefully some right-wingers or somebody responds to your letter, and then more people respond to that, and that's a lot of what gets the word out. Then it becomes a controversy, and maybe the paper might even carry an article about it. But that's part of what worked in Port Angeles. And street action, having a protest rally someplace, or any of the usual actions. But just writing a letter can be really powerful too. So, go ahead and do that.
Yes.
Pedro, I want to add a different perspective to WTO. A labor march was actually needed to be canceled because of the destruction and chaos that was happening because of WTO. Small businesses were damaged, and they were businesses that did not necessarily have insurance to rebuild. And what also happened with WTO was that there were delegations from all over the world, and people from larger delegations had security, were able to make meetings. Smaller delegations did not. And so WTO silenced a lot of people, and as a sixth generation Seattleite, I am not proud whatsoever. I think it was a lot of it was disgraceful, and particularly taking away from efforts of organized labor for people who had worked to march peacefully.
Thank you. And
Well, I really appreciate all of what you all had to say and all your perspectives and finding out some of the facts about the immigration bills and the Gang of Eight and all of that. You don't always know what was going on. And I was in Seattle, and I'm very proud of what we did with the WTO. I was part of representing radical women to meetings at the labor council at the Labor Temple that met for about 6 months, doing work organizing and education. We held education groups like a Woman's Guide to the WTO. And some of what happened is there was a whole police state reaction, in fact, that was a clampdown. And labor, to its credit, actually stepped up and did an additional protest downtown against the what they had implemented.
the cops' riots.
And also like hours, you couldn't be out after certain hours.
Curfews, yeah.
And then the cops were rioting on Capitol Hill, against neighborhood people there. And labor actually stepped up to the plate, which we were very proud of and had been part of urging them to do, and had an important demonstration that went down to the jail. And I think part of it is there were delegations who actually came to the protests and the rallies and spoke out and said, we have been so emboldened. We did not think in the United States there was any opposition to what is going on. And it turned the tide inside the WTO to some of those countries banding together to oppose what the U.S. does. And I think that is some of our role as radicals. And to bring that into the immigration movement also, on what Christina was saying of our role as radicals is to help speak the truth about what is going on and address the problem clearly and openly. And people do respond to that, which is what you saw in Port Angeles and what you saw in Los Angeles. So I think that some is in Seattle, we have to band together and speak out as clear voices opposing what's going on. This city can be so nice, can be so liberal, can be so gentle, covering really kind of malicious racism, malicious sexism, homophobia, that's all under a very liberal, all-encompassing, we're such a loving, welcoming city, and we're not. So I think that's some of what I take out of here is to continue to find like-minded people to speak out together clearly and oppose what's going on in immigration, with the attacks on workers, with the attacks on young people. It's always talked about keeping families together, but it's an attack on children. So that's what I would say.
Right, the Spirit is going to move us tonight. The reality is this, the problem with and I know this is not kosher talk and maybe I should cover up, but the reality is this, the only problem that I see with the WTO is that we didn't call for a general strike.
There you go.
Let's be real. The country has been going down the wrong way for a very long time, and the unfortunate part is that in this country we've never experienced a real labor movement. What we've had has been trade unionists trying to defend what little they've got organized. Screw that. We're talking about all-out organizing. That's what we need to do. We're talking about city to city. Let's shut it down and let's fight a contract. The reality is that the only law that defends workers to try to organize is the NLRA, right? National Labor Relations Act. The National Labor Relations Act is a watered-down version of nothing. Because at the end of the day, this is a problem with organizing, right? Is that the law says you guys have the right to organize. All right, let's organize, right? But the NLRB can't recognize you. So what do? You file for an election. Okay, when does the election take place? 42 days after you file. How many do I need? At least 30%. If you go into an election with 30%, you're going to get creamed, right? So we look for 75% support level. So we get to 75% level. Now, we're talking about 70 years of bad labor history. The minute that you show up to a business and you got workers that are being oppressed, and you tell them, look, brother, look, sister, you sign this card, the law's gonna protect you, we got your back. 45 days later, we're gonna have an election. Well, I'm gonna get fired tomorrow. Yeah, don't worry about that. We got your back. And so you're trying to get people, convince people to jump off a cliff with you, and they're looking down there and like, oh, I don't think so, right? And so we convince them, you've got the power, you can do it. What kind of power? Labor power, right? Let's keep going, and we file for the election. People start getting fired. People are getting scared. We win the election miraculously. Then you got a 7-day period where the boss can come back and say, you know what? No, not really. We didn't like the election results. Let's try it again. And they'll get you on whatever thing. Pedro had a meeting 2 days before the election. He turned over the election. Screw that. Let's have a rerun. We have a rerun. We win. Then, right? Then they say, okay, well, let's bargain. You got a 1-year certificate. What do? Stall. So a year comes up, and then what they say? Oh, you know what? Well, now you have to recertify, have another election. And before you know it, the workers get this crummy contract, and they're looking at it, and like, Pedro, you took us down the road of a 2-year fight to get this? Screw that. And that's what the law has to provide. And at every single step of the way, capitalism has figured out a way, so resilient, right? It's figured out a way how to maneuver around it, and the only people that are getting bushwhacked, right, are workers. And then on top of that, you add the cultural differences, you add the language barriers, you add all these different things that help to continue the oppression. And you talk to an immigrant, and Mexicans or Latinos are one thing, right? And we've got a similar language, and okay, we kind of have a similar history. We're on the same continent. Okay, we figured out we can do it, right? But then you bring in East Asians, you bring in Indians, you bring in East Africans. I'm not saying they're any less developed than we are, because they're very educated. God, civilization came out of there, right? But culturally, they're so diverse and different from what we're used to dealing here traditionally. They're like, no, screw you, you're crazy. And we're asking people to keep diving. It's like, okay, if you keep hitting your head against this wall, you're going to break the wall eventually. Yeah, but my head, dude, what's going on? And that's what we really have. That's what we really have. And so it's not until labor takes a step back and really talk about forming a labor movement. That's what we really don't have in this country. And I think that consciousness needs to be developed one way or another, so that we actually, the radical portion of us comes out and say, you know what? Well, we don't need to be filing all these grievances, because we've got really talented people that all become business agents, and they spend 90% of their time trying to file grievance for that 1% of workers that, God damn it, for whatever reason, he's always in trouble, right? And the other 99% of workers, 95% of workers are simply paying union dues, and they figure, well, the union's just this agency that's collecting my dues, and that's it. And they don't see beyond that, right? But if we were to take a step back and say, you know what? Our job is not to file a grievance. Our job is not to negotiate the next skimpy contract with all these takeaways. Our job as labor is to organize workers. And so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it on an issue basis, and we're going to line up all the contracts in the country, and we're all going to go on strike at the same time. And let's see what capital tries to do then, when we're all on strike at the same time. Guess what? People are going to get filled just like we're getting filled in this room, and they're going to say, you know what? Here in the whole city of Kent, right, which is where we've got our industrial base, in the city of Sumner, where we got our industrial base, right? If we go out there and we do this and we're all on strike, guess what? The bosses are not going to have enough time to bring in replacement workers, because it's going to be the replacement workers on strike with workers. That's the kind of movement that we need to develop in this country. And that's what we need to work for. And I think that's the hope of the future. It really is. And it's us conveying that message to our children, to our grandchildren, right, to the new immigrants, and taking on whatever example we've got of victories, like the sister is doing out there in the peninsula, right? Those are the stories, the real stories that we need to emphasize, that's going to bring us forward. And I think that's the hope. So my problem is that at the WTO, we weren't on strike in LA, in San Francisco, in Oakland. We weren't on strike. We should have called the general strike and shut the whole thing down.
Yeah.
I think this would be a good point to We'll take one more speaker, and then we can all get a drink and talk some more, and look forward to a labor movement that's going to represent the working class and not just a few grievance people. Yes?
My name is Flores Ibarra, and this question is for Christina López. Christina, what is the plan that you have? I mean, we have people from out of town coming to Seattle, visit Seattle, because we are great supporters. But I guess we have a problem at home, and we need to start from right here. What is your plan to protect the Latino families here in Seattle? Because the work that needs to be done, and we need to start taking actions. Like, for example, supporting the people, at the checkpoints in the peninsula. There's a lot of issues. We have issues with education, with health, with housing. But I think immigration reform is time, and we've been taking for granted all these years being here in this country. I think it's time for somebody to stand up and represent our communities with the great supporter of the radical group that we have in here. So please, Christina, if you have a plan, I mean, because I've been asking this question to city members, as people from the city, people who work in education, and they don't have a plan. They don't have an idea what are they gonna do. So we need to come up with a plan, we need to get together, and we need to start taking action.
Right on.
I totally agree. A lot of the elected officials, they really don't care. Their main purpose when they hold office is how to help the corporations make a lot of money. One of the reasons why the Freedom Socialist Party decided to run a presidential campaign, and had a very good experience running as vice president, because it opened up spaces where they normally don't hear from radicals, they don't hear from anti-capitalist people, they don't hear from socialists. All they hear about is from the mainstream news, especially like Fox News or the right-wing radio stations. And so in places like Eastern Washington, they have very backward views on immigration. So when I went there and gave my perspective, I was really glad to be able to talk to people, because the way I see it right now, there has to be a fundamental change. We do need a revolution. Capitalism is the big problem here. I mean, they're in it to make money, and the way they're making money right now is through making life miserable for the rest of us. The rest of us who work for a living, and also using racist policies to divide and conquer us. So we need to overcome that, and one of the goal right now is to raise people's conscious level, so that we can build a lot of support, so we can go on general strike, as Pedro mentioned. And I think that, one of the good ways to do it, going out there, and as a candidate, provided an opportunity to go out there and talk to people, but we don't need a campaign like that. We can just go out there, we have the paper, Facebook, or, just going out there and talking to people and raising consciousness. I mean, I think that story, April, of your mother, I just got sick just listening to that. There's no reason why your mother should have gone through that, and that's all because of the backward immigration policies. But to answer Floor's question, it is awful what's going on right now in a lot of families, but especially in the Latino families. I'm from Arizona, so I hear a lot from what's happening here, but I'm starting to see that it doesn't only happen in Arizona, huh? So the best thing we can do right now is mobilize a public support and also a protest movement. So a lot of those, deportations, a lot of the detentions, and a lot of the, the fact that they're not allowing a lot of immigrants health services or the schools. I think that's where the fight is. I think about what you said about education. That is so true. When I went to Tucson Freedom Summer, a lot of those students that benefited from the ethnic studies, the Mexican American studies, they were really proud of the stuff they learned. They got a lot of awareness of why the things are the way they are, and I think that's why the Tucson Unified School District moved to outlaw it. They don't want students to be aware of why things are the way they are. They want students today to take a test and don't question things the way they are. Just take a test, do your work, do as you're saying. Do what you're told, and don't question it. And that's what they want. And so when you educate these young people about the way things are, And then the young people are going to get ideas like, we're going to protest. We're going to go out there and we're going to change the way that things are. They don't want that. But fortunately, I met a lot of young people here in Seattle also that are not going to put up with it. And that's where the future lies. That's where you're going to see change, is when the youth say, and they are. I mean, there's a lot of young people here. They're not going to take it. And then when they do that, I'm going to be out there, supporting them and walking out with them or whatever they decide to do.
If I could just say something, sure. I can relate to that, because before I got into IWLs, I was really ignorant about a lot of things, and like you said, I don't know if anyone's ever read Paulo Freire. It's a book that
you use that book?
We use a lot of really good authors and stuff. So yes, it definitely does help us and makes us feel empowered. We do get all these ideas that we didn't get in a regular high school, so yeah. That's all.
Great, thank you. There's a nice drink called the Cranberry Fizz, and you can have an opportunity to talk to Lois and Miriam and Pedro and April and Christina, and so I'll call this, I'll adjourn, and so informally we can have lots of conversations, and stick around. I mean, there's a lot of good ideas floating around the room. So thank you very much for coming tonight.